Why don't you marry me? I'm a better match for you than that plain Emily, my sister said, draping her arm over my husband's shoulder and sidling up to him. At that moment, all the restraint I'd managed to hold onto crumbled. The tightly wound thread within me snapped, and I shouted, "Stop fooling around. You've always been like this." Then I lunged at my sister. As she toppled over, still caught in her awkward position, her wide eyes locked onto mine. A hush fell over the scene. This is the story of the chaotic end of my dreadful sister, and I reached. My name is Emily, and I am 27 years old. After graduating from the literature department of a state university, I've been working as a librarian at a public library. During my lunch break, I checked my smartphone and saw a message from my older sister, Michelle. "I'm going to use your blue sandals. They still look new, but that's fine, right?" I sighed, knowing she hadn't changed. Michelle had always been like this, even as kids. If I had something she wanted, she would quickly take it, get bored, and then toss it back to me. Despite being family, she was incredibly beautiful, adored by adults, and often likened to a French doll. She attended a prestigious private university on recommendation and even won a beauty pageant there. Now she uses her looks as a receptionist at a reputable company, living a life straight out of a fairy tale. In contrast, I am quite plain, with a typical American face. People often tell me, "Emily, you look like a traditional doll." Maybe it's my sister's constant bullying, but I've always been shy and introverted. While Michelle played with dolls, I would sit alone, quietly reading a book. But I was content with that, dreaming of a life surrounded by books. I worked hard toward that goal, and now I work as a librarian, a job I've always wanted. Processing checkouts, scanning barcodes, and finding books for library patrons is my daily routine. As I work, memories from high school often resurface. Attending the same school as Michelle was exhausting, constantly hearing comments like, "Is this what Michelle's sister is like?" My one solace was writing book reviews of my favorite books as part of the library committee's activities. While most high school students focus on clubs and relationships, I kept writing, hoping others would appreciate the charm of my favorite books, even if I knew no one would read them. However, there was one person who would eagerly devour my reviews and borrow the books I recommended one by one. This male student was a year ahead of me, and although we never spoke beyond the borrowing process due to my introverted nature, I remembered his name well from a library card. I often found myself wondering about him, how he was doing, if he still found joy in reading books. He was the one who ignited my passion for literature, the person who made me continue to cherish books. Then, one day, a marriage proposal arrived for my older sister, Michelle, at the age of 28. It was only natural for such discussions to arise. During a family gathering, Michelle dramatically tossed the blind date photos and the man's profile onto the table, startling me mid-meal. "What's he like?" my mother inquired. "He's just a chubby, nerdy-looking guy, currently working as a temp," Michelle replied disdainfully. "Why do I have to go on a blind date with him?" she grumbled. I couldn't help but interject. "Well, if you're not interested, just reject him." Michelle sighed. "But he's related to an executive at our client's company. I can't afford to offend him." Then a gleam crossed her face as she turned to me. "Oh, I know. Emily, why don't you go on the blind date instead?" I was taken aback by her suggestion. "What? Me?" I stammered. Michelle hastily continued, "You're quite the respectable nerd yourself, aren't you? You might hit it off with him. Since you're not exactly a knockout, he might be perfect for you. Please take my place this weekend." I hesitated, feeling uneasy about the idea. But I don't want to go either, and it would be dishonest to the other party. How could I explain going your place? Michelle insisted. "It'll be fine as long as you go. Just don't embarrass me. Take the photos and profile." Reluctantly, I accepted the task, though I couldn't help but emit a surprised sound as I examined the materials. "Is there a problem?" Michelle asked, sensing my hesitation. "No, no problem at all." "Thank you, Michelle. I'll give it a shot," I replied, mustering a smile. Michelle grinned. "Ah, so you actually like that chubby nerd. Well, they're all yours now. Here's to the birth of the nerdy couple." Ignoring her teasing tone, I braced myself for the upcoming blind date, uncertain of what to expect. I continued to study the blind date photo and the man's profile. On the day of the blind date, I apologized to him for Michelle's abruptness and expressed my desire to go on the blind date with him instead. The man sitting across from me was indeed a little chubby and had a hint of a nerdy aura about him, but he looked exactly as I remembered. The man I was meeting with was none other than the one who used to borrow books after reading my reviews. He looked at me curiously and said, "Were you, by any chance, the librarian at our high school?" "Yes, that's me," I replied, recognizing him as well. From there, we immediately struck up a conversation about our high school days and our shared love of books, marking the beginning of my relationship with him. His name was Thomas, and he had been in the same class year as Michelle, though she seemed to have no memory of him. During one of our dates, Thomas told me, "Honestly, Emily, if Michelle had come instead of you, I would have turned her down. Her reputation precedes her, and not in a good way. However, knowing me, Michelle would have probably dismissed me first." "I'm truly sorry about my sister's past behavior," I said, "but I'm glad to reconnect with you, Thomas. I think you're wonderful. If you're self-conscious about your appearance, why don't we work on improving it together?" I suggested. "You're right," Thomas agreed. "I've been so focused on work that I've neglected exercise and my appearance. I'll make an effort so you won't be disappointed." "I'm glad to hear that," I reassured him. "But know that your appearance has never been an issue for me." Our conversations and dates flowed smoothly, fostering a genuine connection between us. I received a marriage proposal from Thomas, and we decided to tie the knot. My sister, who initially remarked that she had seen the fat guy's face before, did not attend the event. Nonetheless, our families gathered for the occasion, showering us with warmth and blessings. We found a new home and began building our life together. Then, on our wedding day, as we prepared to walk down the aisle, my sister couldn't resist mocking me. "Getting married in a church these days, so typical of plain old Emily. That dress makes you look like a classic American doll." I tried to brush off her comments, asking her to please refrain from negativity on such an important day. Thomas and his family soon arrived, and I greeted them warmly despite my sister's insults clouding my mood. When Thomas, dressed in a traditional suit, made his entrance, my sister let out a surprised "What?" It was no wonder she was taken aback. Thomas had worked diligently alongside me to transform his appearance, and he now looked strikingly handsome. Before the ceremony began, my sister leaned in and whispered, "He looks nothing like the photo from before." I explained, "Thomas has put in a lot of effort. He always had a handsome face, but he looked lackluster in the previous photo due to being overweight and having an unflattering haircut." "I thought you had plastic surgery," my sister said with sarcasm. "It's quite something that a porcelain doll like you could marry a man who now looks like a movie star." Despite my sister's snide remarks, we made it through the wedding ceremony and celebrated with a small reception at the church, surrounded by our closest loved ones. As we prepared to leave with hearts full of happiness, my sister approached us, drunk, and said, "Hello, Thomas. Thank you for marrying my ugly little sister." Thomas responded calmly, "Well, Emily is far from ugly. Thank you for being here today. It's time you head home now." My sister ignored me and continued, "So, Thomas, you've changed your appearance. But what about your job? You're a temp, right?" "Yes, I'm currently working as a temp," he confirmed. I couldn't stand having a husband who's a temp. "I'm dating a startup CEO, and we might get married soon," my sister said smugly. "Congratulations," I said, but Thomas gently restrained me from saying more. "Thank you for coming today. Please take care on your way home," he added. My sister left after her final comment, and I turned to Thomas, apologizing for her behavior. He reassured me, "It's okay. People like her rarely change. But Emily, you've had a tough time with her. Let's focus on our happiness from now on." "Thank you, Thomas," I said, grateful for his support. And so began my married life with Thomas. In truth, he was working as a temp while pursuing his dream of becoming a novelist. His love for reading had grown after discovering my book reviews, which inspired his passion. In high school, I wrote book reviews that inspired Thomas to start writing himself. So far, he's had a few pieces published in literary magazines, which is an impressive achievement. Although he earns money from his manuscripts, he still faces financial uncertainty, so he balances his job as a temp with his writing. "Thomas, I have a job too, and we have some savings. Why don't you focus solely on your writing?" I suggested. "Emily, you're always so supportive." "Thank you. I'll give it my best shot," Thomas replied gratefully. So Thomas left his job and devoted himself entirely to writing. Though life was challenging, witnessing his passion for his work fueled our determination. Then one day, we received a call from my sister Michelle. She announced her engagement to the startup CEO she had previously mentioned. Next week, he's coming over to meet the family before we get married. You should come too. It would be odd if your jobless husband weren't there, so make sure you dress appropriately, she said, her tone condescending. Despite my irritation at Michelle's attitude, I knew we needed to attend her engagement and wedding. With that in mind, Thomas and I decided to join the family gathering. I'm sorry you'll miss your important event that day, Thomas, I said. Don't worry, Emily. She's your sister, after all, Thomas reassured me. Upon arrival at the venue, Michelle greeted us with a smug expression. Welcome to the antisocial couple. Please be nice to my darling, she quipped. We ignored her jabs and went inside to exchange greetings with Michelle's fiancé. He was flashy and strikingly handsome, a stark contrast to Thomas, but he carried himself confidently in his profession. I'm Emily, Michelle's sister. It's nice to meet you, I said. And I'm Thomas, Emily's husband. A pleasure to meet you, Thomas added. As we exchanged greetings, Michelle's fiancé, Larry, bowed his head politely and responded, Nice to meet you too. I tried my best to ignore my sister's triumphant smile as she stood beside him. At that moment, Thomas's phone rang. I'm sorry, this is important. I need to step outside for a moment, he said. Thomas left the room, and though I was having dinner with our parents, Michelle, and her fiancé, my mind was preoccupied. When Thomas returned, he whispered something in my ear, and I gasped in disbelief. Really? Congratulations, Thomas. That's incredible, I exclaimed, unable to contain my excitement. My mother, surprised by my outburst, asked, What's going on? Not now, Emily. Thomas's novel just won a major literary award, and it's going to be adapted into a movie. Is that true? Congratulations, Thomas, my mother exclaimed, her face lighting up with joy. Yes, that's fantastic news, Thomas. All the support Emily has given you has paid off. Our parents were thrilled, and Larry joined in with his own congratulations. That's wonderful news, Thomas. Let's raise a glass to celebrate. I'm sorry, but I have to give some interviews about the award, Thomas said. As Thomas prepared to leave, my mother began to remark, Well, I guess that's it for Thomas and Emily, when suddenly something unexpected happened involving Michelle. Michelle abruptly stood up from her seat next to Larry and walked over to us, positioning herself between Thomas and me. Hey sis, shut up, you ugly, she began in an icy tone. Thomas, why don't we get married? I'm a far better match for a successful award-winning author like you than someone like Emily, she suggested with a smirk as she placed a hand on Thomas's shoulder and leaned in close to him. I felt my world shatter around me. Michelle always desired what I had, and once she was done with it, she cast it aside. She consistently belittled Thomas and me, but as family, I had always put up with her. This time, however, I could no longer hold back. A rush of tension surged through me and I shouted, That's enough, Michelle. You've always been like this, as I lunged at her. She stumbled back and fell awkwardly to the ground. Thomas, who had been leaning on Michelle, jumped away. Michelle sat on the carpet, stunned, her wide eyes filled with surprise. What on earth are you doing? She cried. That's exactly what I should ask you. What were you thinking? Thomas's voice was cold and sharp as he looked down at her with disdain. I mean, I was offering to marry you, she stammered. Even if I were the last man on earth, I'd say no. Emily is the only one for me, for life. What's so good about Emily? I'm prettier. My figure is better, Michelle protested. Emily is not only beautiful on the outside, but also on the inside, unlike you, Thomas retorted. She's been my support all this time, the reason I achieved these awards. Something you could never accomplish. Thomas walked over and put his arm around my shoulders. I could feel my anger toward Michelle slowly dissipating and warm tears streamed down my face. How dare you reject me after all my advances? Michelle's face flushed red, her voice shaking. Michelle, what are you doing? Do you even understand the significance of this occasion? Our parents scolded her, now fully aware of the situation. Looking as though she had just awakened from a dream, Michelle rushed back to Larry. I'm sorry, Larry, she apologized. Looks like it's going to be you after all, Larry said, exasperated, straightening his tie. That's enough. Stop talking. Who would want to marry someone who throws herself at a married man during a family gathering? He paused, then continued, "Let's call off the engagement. I'm sure you understand why." Our parents turned pale and could only nod in agreement. "Wait, even you, Larry? I've already announced our upcoming wedding to everyone. What happens if you back out now?" my sister shouted. Larry responded calmly, "It's time for me to take my leave." "Congratulations once again, Thomas. All the best to you both." Thomas and I bowed as Larry left the room. Wait, Larry," Michelle cried out, but her desperate calls were in vain. "I am disgusted. Don't show your face for a while," our parents said to Michelle before they too left the restaurant, casting her a contemptuous glance. "Emily, let's go home," Thomas said as he reached for my hand and gave it a comforting squeeze. I held on to him tightly, and as we left the restaurant, I turned back to see my sister, dazed, collapsing in her seat. Fast forward a few months after the end of her engagement with Larry, and my sister seemed downcast for a while. But she soon began seeking a new partner, though she only focused on high-profile men who appeared put off by her mercenary attitude. My sister's once famed beauty is starting to fade with age, which may make her quest for marriage more difficult. Meanwhile, Thomas was kept busy with award ceremonies, interviews, and film releases following his literary success. He has since been able to shift his focus back to his writing projects. Thomas has always been a kind and devoted husband, and now he is known as a loving partner, frequently sharing stories about me during interviews. Supporting my growing belly as our child develops, I pledge to stand by Thomas's side and support him always.